President Obama this weekend said Republicans are making life harder for Americans today, especially those who are unemployed. This after a tough battle in the Senate last week and a Republican filibuster on an extension of jobless benefits. First the president, then Republican response.
Unfortunately, the Republican leadership in the Senate won't even allow this legislation to come up for a vote. And if this obstruction continues, unemployed Americans will see their benefits stop.
So now Republicans say they're looking out for all Americans who want Washington to stop adding to the enormous national debt, pointing out that a Democrat and an independent joined them to block the bill. Mitch McConnell here.
What Republicans have been arguing is that much of this is worthwhile and should be done, but it ought not to add to the deficit. And now, as you indicate, a growing number of Democrats are showing that kind of concern, and that's why this big Democratic majority in the Senate has not been able to pass this bill.
That Mitch McConnell, Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. Now we're going to debate this. Bob McEwen is a former Republican congressman from Ohio and senior fellow of the advocacy group known as United in Purpose. Martin Frost is the former Democratic congressman out of Texas and a Fox News contributor. Gentlemen, how are both of you on a Monday morning?
Very good morning.
Bill.
Good to be with you.
Okay, all right. Bob, who's winning this debate? Who's winning the argument?
Bill, the budget this year is 20% larger than last year. 41 cents out of every dollar that they're spending, they're borrowing. And with all of that new money and all of that borrowing, they're saying now they even need more. They just passed a pay-go measure, patted themselves on the chest and said, we're not going to do this anymore. And the first opportunity they come back and say, no, we want to go out and borrow even more. But the fact is they have 59 votes in the Senate. Republicans have never had 59 votes in the history of the United States. If they can't run this train, they don't need a microphone. They need a mirror to see who's responsible.
Okay, Bob, you point out Republicans are winning this debate. What about that, Martin Frost? The debate on the Democratic side is what, responding to that?
Well, the Republicans want to deny extended unemployment benefits to people who've been out of work. They don't want to give people an opportunity to buy a house. They want states to lay off teachers, creating larger class sizes. Look, there were 56 votes in the Senate for this. 56 Democrats voted in favor of it. The Republicans are hiding behind the skirts of a filibuster. There's a clear majority to pass this emergency legislation. The Republicans simply don't want anything to pass. They want the president to fail so they'll have an issue for the campaign this fall. If they don't like this legislation, let them come up with some alternatives on how to spend for some of these, how to pay for some of these emergency measures. No, they don't want to do that. All they want to do is block this legislation, even though a clear majority of the Senate is in favor of it. We ought to have majority rule in this country.
All right. Both of you gentlemen laid out your points rather well, and I think it comes back to this classic argument. Conservatives versus liberals, or Democrats versus Republicans, or however you want to shape it up. This is a classic battle in Washington. You know, do you rein in the spending? Do you figure out a way to cut down the deficit? Or do you keep spending in order to try to get us out of this economic mess? Bob, ultimately, Bob, ultimately, voters are going to decide this in November. But speaking today, who do you believe is winning this debate? I tell you, anywhere you go in this country, go back to my home state of Ohio, whether it's Democrats or Republicans or independents, they're all trying to get their head around $13 trillion in spending. Or deficit spending, rather, because they don't know what it means or how they can figure it out. I'll get you in a moment.
Bill,
Martin,
Bob,
go first.
Go ahead.
Well,
Bob goes first.
The deficit has traditionally been 2 to 2.5% of GDP, and this president has increased it fivefold to double digits. First time in our nation's history. And the American people are saying enough of the spending and taxing. And they have a voice in Washington, and they are called Republicans. And Republicans are saying with your 20% higher spending than last year, you ought to be able to work out your priorities. And, Bill, as you mentioned, if the president says there's a fireman that's going to get laid off in Dayton, Ohio, then the people of Dayton, Ohio ought to be able to make that decision for themselves. They don't need Pelosi and Reid and Obama borrowing more money from our enemies to lay on our children to hire that policeman or
what about that, Martin? I know you want to jump in there. Go.
Well, I guess Bob hadn't been back to Ohio recently. His state has one of the highest unemployment figures in the entire country, and yet he wants to deny unemployment benefits to those people out of work in his home state. Let the majority vote. There are 56 votes for this. There clearly is a majority in the United States Senate. If Bob doesn't like the fact that the majority rules and if the Democrats have enough votes to pass legislation, let him go out and campaign for some more Republicans this fall. But right now the Democrats are in charge. They ought to be able to do something about unemployment. Jobs are the most important issue in this country, and Bob wants to just hide behind the filibuster and not have the Senate vote.
What about that, Bob? Martin thinks Democrats can win on this issue.
The answer is very, very simple. The question is not whether or not we help the unemployed. The question is whether or not we deal with the pot that we're stealing from people's pockets every day and paying for the unemployed, or do we go to China and get an even greater obligation? My son just returned from his honeymoon. If while he was gone, his mother and I went in and bought all new furniture and all new carpeting and all new appliances, and then as we walked out, we said, here, son, here's 41% of your income to pay for this over the next 10 years. That's what this Congress is doing, and the American people have said, enough.
Wow. I'll give Martin Frost the last word.
I believe that the public will judge the Republicans as heartless and cold this fall when they don't want to provide benefits for people who've been out of work for a long time.
Gentlemen, I appreciate the debate.
I trust
That's
the
why
people.
we hold elections, and we'll figure it out soon enough. Martin Frost, Bob McEwen, thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it today.
Thank you, Bill.
All right.